things there are to hit in modern times. Hopefully you can stick around. We have so much more coming up here tonight covering Irma. We'll take you back to Naples, check in with Paul Goodlow, and of course our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb.
Welcome back to our coverage of Hurricane Irma. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow live on the beach here in Naples, Florida. This area under a mandatory evacuation. Right now, we're talking about 25% of Florida's population asked to evacuate because of this approaching a major hurricane here, a Category 4, but could easily strengthen into a Category 5 hurricane before it comes this way, making landfall on Sunday, perhaps across parts of the Keys, the Florida Keys, and then again making landfall potentially in South Florida, maybe here on the southwest coastline as we head throughout the day on Sunday, and the impacts continuing all day long on Sunday. And again, Irma not just stopping here in Florida, moving northward throughout the state, eventually into areas of Georgia, even the South Carolina area, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, all will have impacts from Hurricane Irma. But let's talk about the soon-to-be impacts. It's right here across areas of Florida. We do have major areas of Central and South Florida under not only hurricane warnings, but storm surge warnings as well. Our hurricane warnings extend basically from just south of Tampa across to Vero and then southward, including the Keys, meaning we are expecting hurricane conditions within the next 36 hours. And many of these hurricane warnings went into effect earlier in the day. I expect the areas under hurricane watch would just include Tampa and Orlando and points northward there across central Florida. Those watches also expect those to turn to warnings as we head throughout the day on Saturday, as we do expect a landfall sometime in early Sunday into South Florida. So again, we are not done by far, and unfortunately, we are expecting the worst from Irma to approach this state. It's not just going to be a heavy rain and strong winds. It's going to be a lot of surge as well. And the governor of Florida, Governor Rick Scott, definitely concerned about how this hurricane could impact this state forever.
We don't want anybody on these roads when the storm's coming through. So we're telling people in those counties in the southern part of the state, if you're not on the road by midnight, all right, don't get on the road. We have shelters in your community. Go to those shelters. I mean, you can go to your family, go to your friends, go to those shelters. But we don't want people on the road when the storm starts to hit.
And here in Collier County, they have shelters set up because they have mandatory evacuations, as well as in Lee County as well. At least 2 of these shelters here in Collier County have been filled to capacity right now, but they have several other shelters. So do not let word of shelters are full discourage you and your family, including your pets, from getting out of these mandatory evacuation zones. And you don't only have to be in a mandatory evacuation zone to evacuate. Yeah, there are a lot of hotels that are in or close to the evacuation areas that are closing down. So people who perhaps are here for vacation, perhaps they already evacuated, like Marco Island started pushing people out yesterday, some of the hotels there. So maybe they came to Naples, or maybe went to areas in close to Fort Myers Beach, and now they're being evacuated too. And some people, visitors, their only resort is a shelter. So do not let a lack of a place to go stop you from going to at least a shelter to keep you and your family safe. Here in the Naples area, the timing of Irma is going to start tomorrow. So again, if you have a few last-minute preparations to do, you got to get it done by lunchtime, by noon tomorrow, because the winds start picking up as we head on towards the afternoon, and we'll definitely start seeing some of the outer rain bands move this way across South Florida and Southwest Florida throughout the afternoon, and definitely by this time tomorrow night, we'll start seeing those bands approach much of South Florida. And with that, we'll start seeing some stronger winds tomorrow afternoon, right on through Monday morning. And here's this, the 100-plus mile-per-hour wind gust, we could see 12, maybe 15 hours of that as we head throughout the day from sunrise to sunset on your Sunday. Maybe a foot of rain, but the important thing, and perhaps the thing that could be life-ending, is that storm surge. We could see some areas here in Southwest Florida, including Naples, up towards Lee County, maybe 8 to 12 feet of storm surge with this. I'm going to bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, to talk about this. And Dr. Knabb, I've been here since Tuesday night, and so many people are so concerned with that center point, that initial center point, the center of Irma. But I keep telling people, you're going to get a hit whether it's the center or not. Irma is a pretty big hurricane, and the impacts are going to be pretty far-reaching with this system.
You are exactly right, Paul, and Irma is getting even larger. Last night, the eye diameter of Irma was about 25 miles. Tonight, it's closer to 40 or 45 miles. So it's getting larger, and the fact that it went from Cat 5 to Cat 4 today is not all good news, because it's been going through internal structural changes in its inner core, the eye wall replacement cycle. That's a temporary downturn in the intensity, and it could come back up to Cat 5 but be larger, wider, and that's a bigger storm surge producer, longer duration of winds, bigger rainfall totals when a hurricane is larger like this. So as of 8 p.m. Eastern time, it's high-end Cat 4, 155 miles an hour, but recent aircraft data suggests it might be strengthening a little bit more. We'll see at 11 if the Hurricane Center brings it back up to Cat 5 or not. They have Air Force Hurricane Hunter plane flying into it. They just went through a little bit ago. Pressure was still about the same, about 924 millibars, but maybe the winds are inching up a little bit. They'll continue to fly there as the center of the hurricane is very very near the northern coast of Cuba will probably spend a little time over land, but probably not enough time to substantially weaken it to greatly lessen the threat to the U.S. But look at how not only is this a larger eye than last night, but the purples, you see how they're kind of contracting as this loop goes on? So this is kind of the completion of the eye wall replacement cycle. Now it can, with this outer eye wall that is contracted in, it can start to strengthen again. Watch how this inner eye wall collapses and this outer eye wall takes over. There it's kind of getting the flat tire in the middle, but then watch this big truck tire on the outside take over and become the dominant eye wall. That's what the structural change has been. That matter to you because that means it could not only re-strengthen to Category 5, but be larger and make it an even greater storm surge threat. And the increased threat to the southwest coast of the Florida Peninsula, where it is extremely storm surge vulnerable, makes this a very scary scenario for the Florida Keys, southwest Florida, especially for storm surge, but other places on both coasts for storm surge, and everybody on the Florida Peninsula for hurricane force winds and for heavy rainfall that could be measured in feet, not just inches. Later on, it will affect the southeastern United States as a weaker system, but perhaps a big rainmaker. Here are the updated storm surge values forecast by the Hurricane Center, forecasting somewhere in this area in southwestern Florida, a very vulnerable area, of 8 to 12 feet, somewhere in this area above normally dry ground, with 5 to 10 feet over the Florida Keys and portions of southeast Florida, and then both coasts, some life-threatening storm surge where storm surge warnings and watches are in effect. Now, what about the timing? We have until tomorrow morning about sunrise, and that's when you need to be ready, because it's about that time that winds of tropical storm force could arrive. And then when you get into Sunday morning, that's when they could arrive up in northern Florida. And all preparations, including evacuations, need to be done by these times. Now, I wanted again to highlight some of the key evacuations in southern Florida and on the Gulf Coast of Florida. The Keys, Miami-Dade, Broward, Palm Beach, mobile homes for everybody. Of course, everybody in the Keys. There's no safe place in the Keys in this event. And mobile homes in a lot of zones in Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach still under evacuation instructions. Don't think that it can't shift back and get a little closer to you all, and with a bigger hurricane that could still generate life-threatening storm surge even if it comes ashore to your west. Now, on the Gulf Coast of Florida, in Collier and Lee counties, they have expanded the evacuation instructions today because of this increased threat of storm surge. Do what your local officials tell you to do, and if you're in these counties and you don't feel safe, you're in a storm surge warning and you don't know what to do, call your local officials and they can help you figure out where to go and how to get there, all the way up into Pinellas County and Tampa Bay area where they've got Zone A mandatory evacuations. And again, this is not just a storm surge issue, Paul, because all of these areas on the Gulf Coast are saying get out of mobile homes. Paul, back to you.
Definitely. Thanks. Dr. Rick Knapp here, our hurricane expert. And I'm in Collier County here where Naples Beach is as well. And this is one of the places where we have mandatory evacuations. In fact, they've actually expanded the area for evacuations earlier today. And now joining us on the phone is Dan Summers with the Collier County Emergency Management Agency. And you guys expanded your mandatory evacuation today. But now we're getting word that some of your shelters are already at capacity here. So what advice do you have people who still need a place to shelter? Will they be turned away if they come to one of the shelters here in Collier County?
Paul, thank you. There are some shelters nearing capacity, but the component here is that folks will still have additional opportunities early in the morning. We're working on a very large list of additional shelters tomorrow morning, and we'll get an early start on that, on getting that information out. So shelters that are full are referring people to other shelters. They're not being turned away. They're just being diverted to other shelters. Then we will make sure that everyone is safe and secure tonight, and we're working throughout the night to expand a very large list of shelters of last resort that will be open tomorrow morning. And we want to remind everyone that our evacuation areas will expand in the morning in conjunction with the additional storm surge values, and we will open additional nearby shelters as refuges tomorrow. So get a good night's rest tonight, get up early in the morning, pay very close attention to local instructions. We'll have additional facilities available. We have some other facilities that we're opening tonight that we will put notices out on. But we too are echoing the concern about the significant storm surge, and will formally expand and provide more detail tomorrow morning on these expanded evacuation areas due to the growing storm surge threat.
And Dan, could you quickly talk about what people can bring to shelters? When I was covering Harvey, people didn't want to leave because they had several pets. So will you accept people who have pets at the shelters here in Collier County?
We have opened a large number of pet-friendly shelters, and there are a couple of logistical issues at a couple of locations. We'll provide additional clarity on that expanded list tomorrow. I expect the majority of those will be pet-friendly, so by all means bring your pet, but listen to radio and television for the best location for you and your pet, and we're working on those additional spaces. Not only facilities tonight, but facilities tomorrow. So don't let the pet defer or deter your evacuation. Just listen, and we'll have some local locations that you can go to that will be appropriate for you and your pet.
Trying to get more subscribers.
Great information. Dan Summers, thanks for your time with the Collier County Emergency Management Agency. Again, you heard it from him. Do not let the fact you have pets delay or discourage you from evacuating. You evacuate with them, but also make sure you bring first food for them, but also make sure you bring a cage or a crate for them as well. You just can't have them on a couple leashes coming into the shelters. Make sure you have a proper place to secure your pet in these shelters, and they are welcomed here across Collier County. In fact, most counties will have a place for you and your pet, so there's no excuse to not evacuate these mandatory evacuation areas. And while the risk for storm surge is sky high here, let's head over to the other side of the coast in South Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, and my colleague Mike Bettis. And Mike, there too, there are some mandatory evacuations. Are you still seeing that same pushback that some people are like, well, that they always have an excuse of why they are not going to evacuate, some because of pets, some because they want to look out for their stuff. Are you still seeing kind of a pushback from people there too?
I mean, there are people that do want to stay. I mean, I think you're going to have that with every storm. There's always going to be somebody, right? But if I would say this, we have run into people that say, I live in a building that's only like 2 years old. It's built to code. I live 5 stories up. I'm out of surge. I'm on the backside of the winds. I think I'm okay. I'm like, at that point, in my opinion, like, okay, if you feel confident and you feel like you're out of harm's way, especially for surge, I'm okay with that. But I think they also realize no one's coming for me if something bad happens too, and that's the risk that you run, right? The good news is, just like Paul was mentioning, we do have pet shelters that are also open here. So there are 2 shelters that take pets here in the county, in Broward County. One's already full. You can't go to Millennium anymore. You can't go to Millennium Middle School. They have other shelters now open for pets. Check online for that. Let's talk a little bit more about the forecast, because now it's getting to be crunch time, right? For Fort Lauderdale, we think the winds really begin to pick up tomorrow. We've had winds this evening, 20 to 25. Hurricane force winds probably won't get here till Sunday, but tropical storm force winds will begin in the morning. They'll last through Sunday evening. 100-mile-per-hour winds are in our forecast for Fort Lauderdale, beginning Sunday morning through Sunday evening, okay? I know that the eye may be shifting a little bit farther west, the forecast for it, okay? But we're still going to see significant winds. 100-mile-per-hour winds will cause damage, will toss trees, will cause power outages. A foot to a foot and a half of rain coming our way. That'll cause some flooding. And then we've got an opportunity for surge. 10 feet of surge we think could be coming our way, and that means that where I'm standing here on Fort Lauderdale Beach, the water will be over my head, over A1A, and likely into the first floors of a lot of the businesses and the condos that are here and hotels right along the street. There's going to be a lot of water here, and it may take some time for it to get out. So just be patient with that. And as soon as the storm passes and the winds come down, you won't exactly be able to just zip right back to your home. It may not happen that way. Let's also talk about flights, by the way, because the last flight left Florida, Fort Lauderdale and Hollywood International at 7:45 this evening. No more flights in or out. Airport has ceased operations at this point, and many of the airports are ceasing operations now. Look at all the cancellations we have for tomorrow. About 2,000 flights have been canceled at the major airports in Florida. We're talking Miami and Fort Lauderdale, Orlando and Tampa and Key West. I mean, they are just racking up now. So no way you're getting in, no way you're getting out, especially in South Florida. Just keep that in mind. Flights not going to happen, especially with the forecast that we've got going on here. All right, Paul, at this point, we're now just waiting on the weather, right? I feel like in so many places, they've done their due diligence. Now we're just waiting for the big show to come, and it's going to be here sooner than later.
Hey, my question for you, I know our colleague Mike Seidel, he shot some video of some beach erosion already on Miami Beach. Have you seen that a little farther north where he is, where you are right now in Fort Lauderdale?
No, we haven't seen that quite yet. What we've seen is just a push of seaweed that's come onto the beach. That's about it. We've got some white caps out there, but I haven't noticed that it's eating away at the beach yet. But I think we're just going to get that steady rise with the onshore flow here. And then eventually I think we're going to eat away a lot of this beach, and most of it's going to go underwater as well. So I hope you got a good look at it today, because it's going to look drastically different come later this weekend, unfortunately.
And real quick, Mike, I know here in the Naples area, very difficult for anyone to get a hotel room around here. Tons of hotels in Fort Lauderdale because of the cruise ship port right there as well. What about hotels? Are they closing up shop? Are they pushing people out of the hotels too?
Yeah, especially everyone that is east of Federal Highway, where they've ordered the mandatory evacuations. There's not a single hotel along A1A here that's open. They're all shut down. And keep in mind, Paul, these are really fortified hotels. I mean, they could take a beating. Not a single soul in them. I think that's amazing. So it's hard to find a place to stay.
All right, Mike Bettis in Fort Lauderdale, thanks for that. And again, as Hurricane Irma continues to approach the area, it will be a Cat 4 or Cat 5. Here's Mark Elliott with the differences of what the categories of hurricanes bring when they approach land.
I'm Gabe Gutierrez at Miami International Airport, where today emotions ran high and patience ran out. This woman separated from her luggage when her flight was canceled, her chemotherapy medicine inside. She and thousands of tourists stranded in South Florida as Irma takes aim.
I don't know what to do.
Manuel Echeverria and his family aren't sure where they'll ride out the storm.
I'm extremely worried. I have 2 kids. You know, I need to take care of my family.
Over the last few days, Miami has had almost double the usual flights to get people out. American, Delta, and United all adding extra trips.
We're working very, very hard to accommodate thousands of people coming through here.
After stranded travelers spent the night here.
We've been here, Katrina, Vilma, nothing really frightening as this.
This afternoon, hundreds were bused to emergency shelters.
I wanted to reiterate that our airport is not a shelter.
Today, ahead of the storm, the last cruise ship left the port of Miami after thousands of tourists were suddenly dropped off in the middle of their vacations.
They didn't even give us an option. They didn't give us any option. They just basically told us that they're just going to put us off in Miami, and we basically had less than a day to figure out.
Natasha Allen was on a 5-day Caribbean cruise for her honeymoon.
I was like literally crying. We had one day, everything was nice, and the next few days on the cruise was just pure chaos, and everybody was really upset.
Tonight, some hoping desperately to make the last flights out, others hunkering down, far from home.
I mean, if you're not worried, I think there's a problem. You know, everybody should be worried, but that only makes you prepare better. So I think I am worried, but I am also prepared. So.
And what have you done to prepare?
I mean, we've managed to do everything that the basics of getting food for 3 days. I added a few extra, went to 3 to 5 days or so. Food, water, you know, and a few other steps going into figuring out how your home is built. Is it concrete block, wood block? If it's a town home, what are the exterior windows, sides? Just basic thinking about the structure and how everything is put together, where the weak points are in the house, and basically trying to prepare those sides better.
Well, it's good that someone is setting the example to channel their anxiety into action, to take some steps in the few hours that we have left in southern Florida into tomorrow morning or midday to get ready for the beginning of tropical storm force winds and then worse from Hurricane Irma. Category 4 right now, could re-strengthen to Category 5, and relative to all of the hazards that Irma's going to bring to Florida, it's also getting larger, which makes it a bigger storm surge producer. Long as it gets larger and perhaps also stronger, that is not good news. So all the more important to be taking steps to get ready tonight and early tomorrow. The forecast track does imply a greater threat of storm surge to the southwest coast of Florida, but not zero threat at all to the east coast. And this could be Category 4, maybe even 5 when it crosses the Florida Keys in one of the worst hurricane events they're going to have in recent memory. And then this is going to affect the entire peninsula of Florida. Perhaps a large number of people on the peninsula getting hurricane force winds because it's coming ashore as such a strong system that it's going to take a long time for this big and strong system to spin down over land. Now, just to give you an idea of how the cone is not the best way to show the risk. Look at how wide the significant chances of tropical storm force winds is relative to the state of Florida. It's almost a certainty the entire peninsula will get tropical storm force winds. With hurricane force winds, the chances are greater on the west coast, but they have not gone all the way down on the east coast. With a strong and large hurricane, even if it comes ashore to the west of Miami, they could get hurricane force winds. And again, remember, in those high rises, the winds can be another category stronger if you get up to the 25th floor. Earliest reasonable time of arrival, time you got to be ready in southeastern Florida and the Florida Keys would be around sunrise tomorrow. You might have a little more time than that, but it is going to be a day when the conditions are deteriorating. And if you look in the Collier County, Naples area, Mark, that's where they might issue new evacuation instructions for storm surge early tomorrow morning. So get up early, and you're going to show people why they're at risk there over the Naples and Fort Myers area.
You know, if people were discounting the cone right off the bat and looking at individual models that were saying the East Coast, they had a real false sense of security when it comes to the risk of storm surge. And now that some of the models are shifting back towards the west, notice the West Coast here, but the East Coast too. I mean, all of South Florida and then up through Southwest Florida, there is a huge risk of storm surge. Zooming in on a couple of areas, in particular, here's Fort Myers Beach, here's the Naples area, and you got the color coding right here, right? Orange to red, 6 to 9 feet, or even 9 feet plus. And yes, this is a problem right along the coastline, but it also is a problem if you go up the rivers towards Fort Myers. You got the big river there, and the water can be pushed through, and as the wind comes through the bays, you could have that water piling right on in, kind of behind Fort Myers Beach. It's one thing to see this in color form on a map, but it's another to really try to understand what all this water means in the real world, right? When you're talking about several feet of water, this has huge impacts for you, right? Let's start out by looking at a storm surge of 1 to 3 feet. Remember, water is extremely heavy and thus extremely damaging. If you were to take one of those normal kind of moving boxes and fill it with water, it weighs about the same amount as a smart car. Okay, this is no small amount of water. Let's roll this forward, right? Because 2 feet can start to float a vehicle. So by car, once you get up to 3 to 6 feet of flooding. This is now, you know, I'm on a good day, a little bit under 6 feet. I'd be underwater at this point. But there's that forecast of 9 feet of storm surge, or even more than that. Here we go. 9 feet covers the first floor of most homes, and by more than 9 feet, this is just a brutal situation, certainly life-threatening, and it is not out of the realm of possibility. Our Hurricane Irma coverage continues right now.
We're in the middle of an emergency. This storm is changing.
We remain under a mandatory evacuation.
The state of emergency is still in effect and will remain so until the threat has passed.
If you're not worried, I think there's a problem. You know, everybody should be worried.
Even though the storm has yet to pass, there will be a long road ahead after Sunday.
Don't try to protect your home. That's what the insurance is for. Don't be a hero. If you've got insurance, you're fine.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow live in Naples, Florida. One of the areas under a mandatory evacuation to the west of US 41, west and south of that area. Mandatory evacuations. They're pleading with people to get off the coastal areas and the barrier islands because of the approach of Hurricane Irma as we head through the weekend here. Storm surge warning here as well as a hurricane warning. We are expecting a surge and hurricane conditions within the next 36 hours. And here in Florida, a large area under a hurricane warning. More people have been evacuated or asked to evacuate than they've ever had in the state before. 25% of the population asked to evacuate. Let's bring in the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, on the phone this evening. And Governor, a wild number here, 25% of the people living or residents of your state asked to evacuate. Just an unheard of amount of people for this approach of a hurricane.
Well, Paul, this is just a massive hurricane. It's bigger than our state. It's going to impact us coast to coast. It's bigger than Andrew, which was a devastating storm. What's really scary is the unbelievable amount of storm surge. You're down in the southwest part of the state right now, and we could see 9+ feet of storm surge. That's over our height. That's over our heads. I've got one last plea to everybody in the Florida Keys. Just think about it. This is going to be, you're going to have 150-mile-an-hour wind. You have potential 9+ feet of storm surge. It's going to be very difficult to survive this. I care about everybody in the Keys. Your families care about you. I'm asking you to get out tonight. You don't have much time to go. There's not going to be anybody that can save you. There might not be anybody that can save you even after the storm if you have a problem. We've already evacuated all the hospitals. The individuals that work in and that do all the first responders have to leave for their own safety. So I'm asking every resident of the Florida Keys to leave and go to safety and do it right now. Do not wait.
And Governor, I believe you have family who sometimes live in this part of Southwest Florida. What about them? Are they evacuated? Are they in a safe area?
Well, I live in Naples, Florida. And part of my family lives in Naples, Florida. They've already evacuated. I'm asking everybody in the entire state, you've got to evacuate. If you're in an evacuation zone, you've got to get out. We have shelters open in every county where there's an evacuation order, plus others, other than Monroe County, which you can evacuate from the Keys into Miami-Dade at Florida International University. You don't have to drive a long way. We have shelters. We're opening more shelters. We're going to do everything we can to get you safe. If you don't know how to evacuate, or you don't have the fuel, you can't get there, call the state emergency hotline. It's 800-342-3557. We will get you out. Just think about this. We all love our families. I wouldn't want to miss it. I love every member of my family. I know everybody loves their family. I can't imagine life without them. We want to keep you safe. And if you're in the south part of the state, by midnight tonight, it's too late to get on the road. This storm's coming. It's not that many hours away. The wind is going to be unbelievable. You cannot be on the road. As you all know, we've worked our tail off to get more fuel in the state, and we're going to keep working on it. But our ports are closing. Our airports are closing. So time is running out to go to safety. I'm asking everybody in the Keys to get out. I'm asking everybody that's in the evacuation zone to evacuate right now. I will do everything I can to keep you safe, but we cannot take care of anybody during the middle of a storm.
And Governor, the last couple of weeks we were dealing with the devastation of Harvey, both from the landfall, the hurricane part, then also the devastating rains around the Houston area. Tremendous support, and even support across the state, the South, as well as the federal government as well. Is there any concern that organizations and agencies like FEMA could be perhaps too stretched thin now to respond to a potential disaster here in Florida, considering they're still dealing with a disaster going on currently in Texas after Harvey?
I've talked to the president pretty much every day. The vice president has reached out. I've talked to most of the cabinet members in the cabinet. They've all assured me, and the president does every day, he will do everything. He will provide every resource that the federal government can provide. FEMA is in this job. The lady that runs the Southeast does a wonderful job. I've worked with her in the past. She's at our emergency center in Tallahassee. But I've worked, Scott Pruitt at EPA, everybody has reached out to see what can they do to be helpful. I talked to Secretary Tom Price tonight. We're air evacuating nurses right now from Texas. We do need, by the way, 1,000 nurses to help staff our special needs shelters right now. So I'm asking people to volunteer for that. But I can tell you, people are showing up. We already have 17,000 volunteers. People have committed, but we're going to need more. This is going to be a devastating storm, but I am personally going to do everything I can, and I know the federal government's going to work hard, state and local. We're going to do everything we can to keep everybody safe.
And Governor, this has got to be one of the worst case scenarios in terms of nightmares of what could happen to your state. I know there have been mandatory evacuations for a couple of days now across portions of your state. Has there been a pretty much overwhelming support of those evacuations, or do you think it's been kind of 50-50? Do you have any numbers in terms of who still has not evacuated these mandatory areas?
Well, you can see with our highways, and you can see how many people bought fuel, that people are moving to safety. But as you know, the storm has changed further west in the last few hours. That means we're going to have more storm surge. So we've added more evacuation zones. I was in Palm Beach today. I was in Tampa, and I was in Fort Myers today, just doing everything I can to learn what needs people have, and also make sure people are evacuating. So we're opening up shelters. I want to thank Ave Maria University down in Immokalee. They've opened up their field house tonight. There's so many people that are reaching out to do everything they can to be helpful to us. I'm going to say a lot of prayers for everybody in my state. But if you're in an evacuation zone, I just ask you, take care of yourself, take care of your family. We want you to be safe.
And I do think that a lot of people here in Southwest Florida did heed that evacuation with the change in the forecast, and they've been moving out. In fact, we've noticed more and more gas stations here across Collier County and Lee County are now running out of gas and saying no more gas in these stations, and longer lines at the stations that still have gas. You mentioned something about if people are in need of fuel. How can they get that fuel if they're in need of fuel to get out of harm's way?
Well, we've been working to get more fuel in the state. They provided law enforcement escorts to our carriers that are taking fuel from our depots to our gas stations. We've asked our gas stations in evacuation areas to stay open as late as possible. We'll provide you police escort for your employees to get out of the evacuation area to make sure they go to safety. We have the federal government has waived rules that allow us to get more fuel in the state. The EPA, the Department of Energy, and the White House have been instrumental. Vice President Pence was very instrumental in getting that done. President Trump was very instrumental in getting that done. So we've gotten a lot of fuel into our state, but we've used a lot of fuel. And so at this time, it's very difficult to get more fuel in the state and to get more fuel in these roads. We still have more fuel coming in the northern part of the state. It's very difficult now, but the port's closing to get fuel into the southern part of the state.
All right, great information. That is the governor of Florida, Governor Rick Scott. Thanks so much for joining us this evening on the phone talking about this. And now I want to switch gears and talk to our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, back in the studio here. And again, Dr. Knabb, it's all about timing now. You know, people perhaps with this plea from the governor to say to get out, the clock is ticking. Let's talk about the drop-dead times here in terms of you should not even attempt to leave because the weather conditions going downhill with the approach of Irma.
Yeah, now that will essentially be a game time decision for folks and local officials tomorrow. But in terms of planning purposes for the Florida Keys and extreme southeastern Florida, you got to be thinking I might get winds of tropical storm force starting as early as 8 a.m. tomorrow. And then in the Collier County area, maybe it would be midday to early afternoon or later. And I think we still have Governor Scott on the line. Governor Scott, this is Dr. Knabb. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Hey, Governor, one thing that we've been talking to some of the local emergency managers about in Southwest, getting concerned, as I'm sure all of you are. What can we tell folks about how they can work together? Because some people are struggling to identify a shelter, although local EMs will tell them, where they might be able to go tomorrow. But help me get the message out to the folks who are not in an evacuation zone who might be able to host someone who needs to evacuate.
If you go to floridadisaster.org, or if you call the statewide emergency hotline, 1-800-342-3557. All right, if you can do that, you can go to airbnb/Florida. If you are an evacuee looking for something, or if you're somebody that can host something, all those ways you can be helpful. I ask people, check on your neighbors. Check on your family. We all know the people that are more vulnerable. So I'm asking people to do that. And we can't evacuate you in the middle of the storm. But if you're in an evacuation zone, if you need help, or if you're not in an evacuation zone and you need help getting into a shelter, if you'll call that statewide emergency hotline, we'll connect you with your local emergency management team, and they will do everything they can to get you to safety. I've said all along, I will bear no expense to save a life. We're going to do everything we can to save every life in this state.
Yeah, Governor, thank you so much for everything you're doing. And I know that you and the state emergency managers, local emergency managers have been talking to the Hurricane Center and the local forecast offices through the Hurricane Liaison team to help the local emergency managers make these evacuation decisions. Any particular areas, Governor, that you're most concerned about people being able to get out in time?
Well, right now, there's still some people in the Keys. All the first responders leaving the Keys right now. So just think about the Keys for a second. Look at all the bridges we have down there. If we lose one bridge, everything south of the bridge, everybody's going to be stranded. It's going to take us a while to get back in there to try to provide services. Now, we want to do it, but it's going to take a while when that happens. I'm really worried that now the storm surge that we're starting to hear about on the West Coast. I know I was down in Fort Myers today. I know they're very focused on both opening up shelters, and they're very focused on getting the word out that you've got to evacuate. But it's getting late. We don't have that many hours left. We're going to start getting the wind in the next, by 8 o'clock tomorrow morning in the Keys and probably some in Southwest Florida. So we're running out of time. People have got to take an action right now.
Yes, Governor, thank you for emphasizing that. And one additional point that I've been trying to make for folks in southeastern Florida, for example, who might be thinking, okay, models have shifted west and maybe I'm not going to get much. But one thing that we're seeing on the satellite imagery tonight is that the hurricane is getting wider, which means you don't have to be all that near the center of the eye to get hurricane force winds, storm surge. So I want to give you a chance to reemphasize to folks on the east coast of Florida that this is no time to undo your plans and evacuations.
It's going to be massive. This is good. This is so much bigger than Andrew was. Andrew was devastating to this state. This is bigger than coast to coast. They're going to have the winds that it seems like at least what Andrew had. We're going to have storm surge, and let's all remember this storm can change. Remember, Andrew changed in the last half hour, and it came a little bit further south. Everybody thought it was going to come up the Miami River. I was in the hospital business then. I evacuated hospitals. I had a hospital decimated by Andrew. We hadn't been patients for hours to save their life. This is a life-threatening storm that's going to impact both of our coasts. You do not let your guard down. You need to, if you're in an evacuation zone, you need to evacuate.
Governor, thank you so much for reminding us of how this is bigger than Andrew. And by the way, for folks in Southwest Florida, this is bigger than Charlie. So the storm surge could be just as high over a wider area. Follow the instructions of your local officials to evacuate. More coverage on Hurricane Irma coming up.
Hurricane Irma, a major threat to the state of Florida. In fact, 16 million Floridians are under hurricane warnings right now, with evacuation posts as this massive hurricane makes its approach. Category 4 hurricane, not out of the question that it could potentially re-strengthen as it gets closer and closer to the Florida Keys. Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Mike Bettis coming to you live from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where the winds have been picking up steadily this afternoon and this evening. This is just the beginning, likely to double by tomorrow morning. We're expecting tropical storm force winds by that time, then hurricane force winds by Sunday morning. Of course, many locations prepping and evacuating because of Irma, including Miami-Dade. NBC's Carrie Sanders is there.
Put all your family members in here.
Tonight throughout South Florida, chaos as more residents race against time to escape Irma's wrath.
Very concerned. Very concerned.
On gridlocked highways, searching for gas that's becoming harder to find. At the bus station, passengers with tickets, but no buses.
But they can't even give us an ETA on the buses.
An estimated 500,000 people heading to more than 40 shelters today.
When you see the destruction in the Caribbean, do you now wish maybe you'd left?
Yeah, I suppose so. Some people finding there's no more room. Hurricane Irma, with winds of 155 miles an hour, double the size of Florida's most destructive hurricane, Andrew, in 1992.
We are running out of time. The storm is almost here. If you are in an evacuation zone, you need to go now. This is a catastrophic storm that our state has never seen.
And coming with Irma, a deadly storm surge up to 12 feet. Southwest Florida could see the most flooding. In just 6 inches of water, a car engine stalls. 2 feet and the car is floating. 3 to 6 feet, life-threatening, in part because of everything floating in the current. At 9 feet, the water is above the first floor. Despite the danger, some residents staying put, like Richard Chrysler, who made sure to secure all the boats at his marina club.
I've got a gut feeling I haven't had before. This one is really scary.
Some of the most vulnerable, the residents in trailer parks who cannot afford to leave.
This is gonna be wiped out.
Authorities detaining the homeless to protect them against the storm. Throughout the day, last-minute shopping for crucial supplies. Police helping to manage out-of-control lines at this Home Depot. One man about to buy the last generator at this store, giving it up to a woman for her sick father's medical needs.
An angel from God is what he is.
Another urgent threat, the dike on Lake Okeechobee. 40,000 residents advised overnight, evacuate. Fears the dike could breach, causing Katrina-style flooding. In South Florida, trash collectors urgently picking up debris today that could turn into projectile missiles in hurricane-force winds. And at Zoo Miami, pink flamingos moved indoors. All 3,000 animals will shelter in place. Now with the storm less than 16 hours away, normal bustling coastal communities, including famed South Beach, virtual ghost towns.
And it looks like a lot of those beaches could take an absolute beating from the storm surge. And unfortunately, we think that in fear that many of them may be unrecognizable by the time the weekend is over. We know that the winds have picked up quite a bit, by the way, here. I'm going to show you, hold up, I've got an anemometer actually attached to my tablet here. And the winds are generally right around 20 miles an hour with gusts approaching 30. But they double, okay? By the time we hit tomorrow, these winds will be double, okay? And we know that the forecast for 100-mile-per-hour winds is in the cards all day Sunday. Stay tuned. We've got much more coverage for you right here on the Weather Channel. Taking you back to Naples and checking in with hurricane expert Dr. Rick Knabb.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow, live in Naples Beach, Florida, in Collier County. This area under a mandatory evacuation. We also want to say welcome to all our viewers and listeners on Sirius XM radio right now, as well as people watching us on the Local Now app. Again, anywhere here in Florida, you download the Local Now app and you can actually watch Weather Channel coverage of Hurricane Irma throughout this. Now, we're also concerned with, because we are under a mandatory evacuation, but we're also under a hurricane warning. Last night we were under a hurricane watch. Now we have a warning, but it's not just here. In fact, the warning goes farther north of here and also eastward onto the east coast of Florida, and then everywhere south, including the Keys. And a hurricane warning means within the next 36 hours, we are expecting hurricane conditions in this area, for some as early as tomorrow morning. And by the way, the same area also under a storm surge warning, which is one of the biggest threats we have with this approaching hurricane, including right here in southwestern Florida. A huge risk of storm surge, perhaps 8 to 10, even 12 feet. Much larger and higher than you had with hurricanes Wilma and Charlie, the two of the last powerful hurricanes that impacted this area. In fact, could be a storm surge that could rival what happened back in the early 60s with Hurricane Donna in this area. Many people weren't even living in this area, even alive, the last time you had a hurricane with this type of potential approach this area of southwestern Florida. There's also concern of the East Coast, and especially down east coast of Florida, as well as the Florida Keys as well. They could see a landfall, direct hit of the eye of Irma as we head into the early hours of your Sunday morning. And in fact, the governor has been pleading people to heed the evacuation orders, and he even warned people in the Keys, your time to evacuate is running out.
We don't want anybody on these roads when the storm's coming through. So we're telling people in those counties in the southern part of the state, if you're not on the road by midnight, all right, don't get on the road. We have shelters in your community. Go to those shelters. I mean, you can go to your family, go to your friends, go to those shelters. But we don't want people on the road when the storm starts to hit.
And let's talk about what's going on here in terms of the forecast, specifically here in Naples and southwest Florida. We're expecting the weather to go downhill throughout the day tomorrow. So you might have till about maybe lunchtime before you need to wrap up any evacuation or preparations outdoors that you have. And as we head on towards this time tomorrow, we could be dealing with tropical storm force winds. Will only get higher as we head into the Sunday morning hours. So basically from sunrise to sunset on Sunday, we could see the closest pass or maybe even a direct hit from Hurricane Irma here in Collier and Lee counties. And we're talking we could have wind gusts over 100 miles per hour for maybe 12 to 15 hours in this part of Florida. Rainfall easily, maybe a half foot to a foot of rain, but it's that storm surge that is the biggest concern for this very vulnerable coastline here in the Barrier Islands. Maybe up to 12 feet, 6 to 12 feet of storm surge. And if you look at our storm surge forecast graphic, it shows much of southwest Florida in that red, but also the Keys could see a 5 to 10 foot storm surge, which it also extends northward into Miami Beach, even up towards Fort Lauderdale as well, and even Tampa. Right now, it's only a 3 to 5 foot storm surge, but that could be larger as we go throughout Sunday into Monday across parts of central and northern Florida. And this is the biggest concern with storm surge, is you cannot escape the rising water, and sometimes it rises fast as well. A 1 to 3 foot storm surge has the potential to perhaps stall out your car, maybe even float your car as well. And you could see widespread power outages just because of the surge of the ocean into the areas. A 3 to 6 foot storm surge potential could be life-threatening. Definitely could damage buildings and enter a lot of homes as well, perhaps even halfway up the front door of your house. And then we start going in that 6 to 9 foot storm surge that could devastate and totally destroy structures, including your home. Major damage of buildings, even possible destruction of buildings. And we could have the surge is not just going to be first couple of yards here on the beach. It could extend maybe a mile inland. So if you think, oh, I'm a half mile from the beach, you too have to concern yourselves with a storm surge. And that's just a 6 to 9 foot storm surge potential. This forecast could be up to a 12-foot storm surge in some portions here in southwestern Florida as the approach of Hurricane Irma continues now, and literally hours away from where I'm standing right now. So the time is running out. Let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, to talk about this. And Dr. Knabb, people are saying, well, hopefully the center of Irma will interact with portions of the land of Cuba, and maybe that will start weakening it before it approaches Florida. So they're hoping that it won't be a big impact. But even if it does impact with Florida, Dr. Knabb, it can still get itself back together and maybe be a strong 4, maybe a category 5 at landfall.
Yeah, yes, it could. And most of the model guidance we're looking at does not indicate that it's going to spend a lot of time with the entire eye and eye wall over Cuba. So it's going to be moving mostly along the northern coast of Cuba and probably not weaken it substantially, if at all, because Irma is so strong and now so large that it's going to be very resilient once it actually does clear Cuba for good. And right now, we are just a few moments away before 11 p.m. from getting the new advisory from the Hurricane Center, and it might very well be that they up it back to Cat 5 based on what the aircraft data are showing. We'll have to see. But right now, high-end Cat 4 with winds 155 miles per hour. And one thing when we take a very close look at this that you can tell is, look at during this loop, how the width of the purples starts to get smaller. It's contracting again, getting more organized again after having gone through some internal structural changes, having gone through an eye wall replacement cycle. And as it just about makes landfall here on these Cuban Keys here on the northern coast of the island, it is starting to get better organized again. And I want to show you what it went through over the last day or so. Look at this inner eye wall starting to collapse and then this outer eye wall taking over as it passed north of Hispaniola. So this is an eye wall replacement cycle. It's kind of like you get a flat tire, you replace it with a bigger tire, and now what it's doing is that big tire is contracting. And so it's maybe temporarily weakened to Cat 4, very good chance it comes back up to Cat 5, so it's not necessarily good news that it went down to 4. It'll probably come back to 5 again and be larger. So all of that means to you that we could have a larger hurricane than what it was when it was Cat 5 last time, an expansion of the hurricane force winds and winds of tropical storm force, and that makes it a bigger storm surge producer. Now, Hurricane Center is forecasting a Category 4 hurricane coming into the Florida Keys and then weakening gradually as it goes near or over the Florida Peninsula. So this is going to be an absolutely devastating, deadly hit in the Florida Keys and for other portions of the Florida Peninsula, with a grave risk increasing with the storm surge threat in southwestern Florida. But the storm surge threat and the major hurricane force winds are still a risk on the eastern coast of Florida. So we've got hurricane warnings and storm surge warnings along both coasts. Let's take a closer look at southwest Florida, where we're really concerned in the Naples-Fort Myers area. Here in Collier County, they've already called for evacuations south and west of US 41. You can see why. Potential storm surge flooding above normally dry ground is not just an immediate beachfront problem. Look how much farther it goes in from the immediate beach in the Fort Myers area. And so that's why there are some very important evacuation instructions that have already been called. In Collier County, for example, mandatory evacuations west and south of US 41, including the islands, strongly advised for mobile homes. But because tomorrow, Paul, about midday to early afternoon is the possible time frame of the arrival of winds of tropical storm force. That's why Collier County Emergency Management Dan Summers, that you talked to earlier, said that there might be some time tomorrow to get new evacuation instructions. So folks in the Naples area need to be up early. Back to you.
Definitely. Thanks, Dr. Knabb. Again, some of the shelters are filling up, but again, they will find a place for you and your pets. So do not let talk of shelters are filled up to discourage you from evacuating. Again, you want to do that where you are feeling some of the gustier winds now. So it was a gentle breeze earlier. Yesterday, no breeze at all outside of the thunderstorms that popped up. So we're starting to see and feel a little bit more wind here. This will be nothing compared to what we'll see 24 hours, even 48 hours from now. So it only gets worse from here. Now, while I'm on the southwest corner of the state, we also have a big concern of impacts on the southeast coast of Florida. And joining us on the phone right now, let's bring in Chief Dan Waters with the Martin County, Florida Office of Emergency Management. Again, Martin County, just north of Palm Beach County there on the east coast. And thanks for joining us, Chief. Can you talk about what you're telling people in your county when it comes to evacuations?
We're telling our people for the past several days that if they were going to be leaving the area, they needed to do so earlier because of the number of people leaving the South Florida area, making transitions through the state. And for those people who were not making preparations to leave, who planned on staying at home, they needed to have enough supplies to stay in their home for 5 days with all the food, water, medicines, and supplies that they need to protect themselves. We have issued voluntary evacuation orders for those days, and as of tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., we have a mandatory evacuation area for our barrier islands, our low-lying areas, and those A and B storm surge areas, which could be affected as a storm comes ashore.
And Chief, let's talk about the types of shelters you have set up. First, are they nearing capacity? And second, are they the type of shelters, or do you have shelters that will also accept pets? And if you do the pet owners have to bring certain things with them along with their pets?
All of our shelters are at schools. We have made arrangements with our Humane Society to accept pets as being the pet shelter in our school or in our county, and our schools are not accepting pets with them. So we've worked out with the Humane Society to take pets for the people. They are filling up in capacity. Our shelters are located throughout the community, and again, that's why we're communicating to the people that if they needed to use a shelter, then they will be opening as of 8 a.m. tomorrow morning so that they can transition closely to the schools in their community. We've identified those schools to the citizens so that they.
So will there be any point in Martin County that you will say, no, okay, the shelter is too full, we cannot accept you?
We are working on our primary shelters, and if necessary, we have asked for state support. The Florida National Guard has joined us to assist us in opening additional shelters should that be necessary inside the county because of the number of people we expect could be evacuating.
All right, so bottom line is if they come, you will somehow find a place for them, correct?
Absolutely.
All right, great to hear. Thank you so much for your time. That is Chief Dan Waters there with the Martin County, Florida Office of Emergency Management. So like so many county officials we've been talking to, and even the governor will not spare any expense to keep people safe. That's his number one priority. I've yet to come across any county official saying, or even city official saying that, if they're full, you're kind of out of luck. That is not the case. If you need shelter, they will find it for you. It's better to, waste a day or two in a shelter than wish you would have wasted a day or two in a shelter. And, better to have and not use than need and not be able to get there, because it gets to a point where even first responders will not come get you because it's going to be that dangerous in many parts of Florida. And again, this storm is not just going to be a Florida storm. It's going to affect portions of Georgia, the Carolinas, as well as Tennessee and Alabama. Again, that's days down the road. Right now, we're definitely still focused here on Florida. And speaking of focus, let's move on towards the east coast to south of Martin County by a couple of counties into Broward County. That's where Fort Lauderdale is, and my colleague Mike Bettis. And Mike, again, any concern there in Broward County of shelters being at or near capacity tonight?
Yeah, I mean, of course. And if you go to the website, Broward County for Hurricanes, you'll see there are numerous shelters. They're at full capacity right now, and they can't take any more people. So they're making contingency plans today, and they've been doing that to get more shelters open. They're actually opening up more pet-friendly shelters as well, because the one pet-friendly shelter they had was at capacity today. So it's great on one hand to see all these people that are going there to be safe, but on the other hand, maybe there was at some point in time some underestimation of how many people they'd actually have to house. So that does become a concern, but I think that speaking with them today, Broward County, they're confident that everyone that needs shelter will indeed have a place to go. But keep in mind, these aren't, it's not like staying at the Ritz-Carlton, my friends. It's just a roof over your head. That's it. Okay, make sure that you take some items with you, especially for your pets. They're not going to have food or water for them. So make sure that you're aware of that when you go there. Obviously, travel is severely interrupted across South Florida, especially when it comes to the airlines. At Fort Lauderdale International, last flight went out at 7:45. And so no more flights in or out. They're ceasing operations through the weekend. Miami, same thing for us here. And a lot of people are trying to get out. And a lot of the airlines brought in extra planes just to get people out of here, right? And so now you look at the cancellations that are piling up for tomorrow. There aren't going to be any more flights, all right? You won't be able to fly in these kind of winds. Almost 2,000 flights canceled from Miami to Fort Lauderdale to Orlando to Tampa to the Keys. You're not going to get a flight out any longer. So at this point, if you feel like you need to evacuate, you're going to have to drive. And if that's not an option for you, you're going to have to find a safe place to hunker down. Maybe it's in a shelter, maybe it's somewhere else. But Paul, I look at the. I haven't been able to see what your shot looks like, but the winds have picked up quite a bit here today. A lot of churn out there in the ocean now. I'm really concerned about what a lot of these beaches are going to look like, come Monday. I think about some of the beaches where you are, Paul. Siesta Key, just north of you, often voted the most beautiful beach in America. And to think what could happen now that this eye may come very, very close, if not come right over top of you.
Yeah, a great beach for doing a little shell hunting as well. All these beaches here in Southwest Florida. And Mike, our breeze has been kicking up a little bit since the sun has gone down today. So I'm pretty sure the Gulf will be a lot choppier when we head towards tomorrow. It was like a lake about 48 hours ago when we got here. It was beautiful on Wednesday, but it's been churning up ever so slowly ever since, but it'll be pretty rough as well. Hey, a quick question there, Mike, in Fort Lauderdale. It's a huge cruise port there as well. I know that they have cruises because of Irma. Are there any cruise ships at port, or have they left as well?
Actually, Paul, I haven't checked. We spent a lot of our time here, but when I checked with them earlier today, what they were doing with a lot of their ships was getting them out so that they wouldn't be in port, because it's often a dangerous place for the ships to be. And some of the ships that were coming back, they're actually staying out longer and not coming back till after Irma passes. So hopefully all the boats are gone.
All right, that's Mike Bettis live tonight in Fort Lauderdale. Check back with him coming up in a few minutes. But let's talk about this. People have caught up on the strength of Irma, Category 4, Category 5, while Mark Elliott talks about each category of a hurricane and the dangers each one brings.
When it comes to hurricanes, each one's impacts are a little bit different, but the wind speeds that we talk about along the Saffir-Simpson scale, those are very specific. And the damage caused in those categories, kind of predictable. So let me show you. Let's start off with a Category 1 storm. And the damage here, not too bad. A couple of shingles fall off, you can have some palm fronds bending in the wind, but everything basically remains intact. Category 2, that's where you really start to feel it. Look at the windows of the house. They can be hit from debris from the outside and already start breaking in a Category 2. Your trees are significantly bent over in the wind, and the siding of the house itself can break, flapping there in the wind, adding to those eerie noises inside. Category 3. I've heard only a Category 3, but it's not only anything except really bad news. In a Category 3, you can have the door of the house blown in because the winds get so strong. You can have the roof of the house start to flap up and down in the wind because it can lift off those weak points, and a lot of those trees start to fall. Category 4, the damage is even worse. You get most trees falling, most of your windows breaking, most of your shingles fly away, and then Cat 5 is as high as the category scale goes. By Cat 5, no shingles remain anywhere nearby. The holes in the roof get so big that the walls of the house start to fall because they're not attached to anything anymore. There won't be any trees up in the neighborhood. That's just catastrophic damage.
I mean, if you're not worried, I think there's a problem. You know, everybody should be worried, but that only makes you prepare better. So I think I am worried, but I am also prepared. So.
And what have you done to prepare?
I mean, we've managed to do everything that the basics of getting food for 3 days. I added a few extra, went to 3 to 5 days or so. Food, water, you know, and a few other steps going into figuring out how your home is built. Is it concrete block, wood block? If it's a town home, what are the exterior windows, sides? Just basic thinking about the structure and how everything is put together, where the weak points are in the house, and basically trying to prepare those sides better.
Well, as we await the new advisory from the National Hurricane Center, which hasn't been sent out just yet for 11 p.m., I want to emphasize how important that gentleman's mindset is to channel your anxiety into preparation. And just to add a few more tidbits of helpful information for you, some things that might be easy to forget to do before a hurricane comes is to get cash, fill prescriptions, fill a propane tank so that you can cook after the power goes out, and remind yourself not to run a generator indoors. Carbon monoxide can wipe out families. Don't light candles indoors. Keep some of these things in mind as we get ready for the onslaught of Irma here in the United States, as it is now going just about onshore on the northern coast of Cuba, and as a high-end Category 4, borderline Category 5 hurricane moving toward the west. And as we look at the forecast path that was issued back at 5 p.m., of course, this could shift one way or the other here with the 11 a.m. update. We're talking about a devastating hurricane, Category 4 or 5, coming when we get into early morning hours on Sunday, and then moving into the Florida Peninsula, and not just a powerful hurricane, but a very wide one, a large one that could bring hurricane force winds, storm surge, heavy rainfall to the east coast and west coast of Florida, and much of the Florida Peninsula. Even inland areas could get hurricane force winds and heavy rainfall, and there's going to be the tornado threat. Now, one thing that has been happening is that the hurricane has been contracting. Even though the eye is larger than it was last night, it might be on a contracting and strengthening trend overnight, and that's obviously very concerning. Because it's going to be so strong and so large, and because it is moving toward an incredibly vulnerable area to storm surge in southwest Florida, that's why the values are the greatest for how high above normally dry ground the storm surge values could get. 8 to 12 feet above normally dry ground in southwest Florida. And that's why there are some very critical evacuation decisions already been made in highlighting Collier County, the Naples area. So far, mandatory evacuations for west and south of US 41, including the islands, strongly advising people in mobile homes to get out. That's a pretty good no-brainer there to get out of mobile homes for a hurricane. And the idea for tomorrow is that the winds of tropical storm force could arrive in the Naples area, for example, maybe midday, early afternoon. So, Mark, that's why folks in the Naples area need to wake up early tomorrow, because there might be new expanded evacuation instructions for the deadliest hurricane hazard of all, storm surge.
Yeah, Dr. Knapp, that is a good point, because there very well could be new evacuations ordered. On the scale of this is why we're concerned. Evacuations are very rarely put in place because of wind. You can hide from the wind, especially if you're in the post-Andrew constructed buildings, if you've got your shutters closed in, if you're in that interior room, you can ride out a lot of wind. But you can't ride out a lot of water. And unfortunately, as Dr. Knapp mentioned, look how vulnerable this section of Florida is. The scale over there, the red colors, 9 feet plus the potential for the storm surge here. There is still a risk here in southeast Florida. And remember, all these values are for the amount of water that's up above your head over normally dry ground. Let's zoom in for you here on southwest Florida. Dive in towards Fort Myers, towards the vulnerable Naples area, Naples down here. Notice how far inland some of this flooding can go. This is not just an immediate coast thing. This could be miles inland, especially if you consider along the rivers near Fort Myers. That water can be piled up through the bays, get pushed up the rivers. This could be just the worst case scenario. But it's one thing to see it on a map like this. Let's talk about what it actually feels like, what it means to your home and to your stuff if you wind up in a storm surge area. Okay, so the minimal area, the 1 to 3 feet of surge, right? Take a look at this. That's already up above the wheels of cars, and it only takes about 2 feet of moving water to float most vehicles away. They act like boats. The buoyancy comes up. Plus, water's got a whole lot of weight to it. If you fill one of those normal moving size boxes with water, it weighs as much as a smart car. Then you've got the wave action on top of that. But the surge alone can get much higher. Let's go up a category. Now, on a good day, just under 6 feet. So at this stage of the storm surge, water would already be above my head. Remember, that's water above normally dry ground. Then we can go even more extreme. You saw so much of the area of southwest Florida is in that red color. The red coloring here, as we zoom out for you here, that would cover the house, right? Your whole first floor basically covered up in water, maybe getting to the roof line in some cases, and yet the forecast in this case would not be out of the question to go 9 to 12 feet. That, of course, is a life-threatening, serious situation. More coverage on Hurricane Irma continues right now.
We're in the middle of an emergency. This storm is changing.
We remain under a mandatory evacuation.
The state of emergency is still in effect and will remain so until the threat has passed.
If you're not worried, I think there's a problem. Everybody should be worried.
Even though the storm has yet to pass, there will be a long road ahead after Sunday.
Don't try to protect your home. That's what the insurance is for. Don't be a hero. If you got it.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Irma. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow live in Naples, Florida, and this area of the beach under a mandatory evacuation. We have breaking news now. The 11 o'clock advisory is in on Hurricane Irma. It is now back to a Category 5. Let's bring in our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, with the latest on Hurricane Irma.
Now, Irma is once again a Category 5. This is not a tremendous surprise given what we saw earlier in the Air Force Hurricane Hunter reconnaissance data, where based on the flight level winds and the step frequency microwave radiometer, the instrument that's mounted on the underside of the wing, and it can remotely measure wind speeds all the way up to Cat 5, that was what did it. And it is now a Category 5 with max winds of 160 miles per hour as the center is very close to the northern central coast of Cuba. Pressure is at 924 and it continues to move westward at 13 miles per hour. And it is a larger hurricane, wider than it was 24 hours ago in terms of the size of the eye. But of course, the eye might be in the process of contracting again as re-strengthening occurs. So it has gone through an eye wall replacement cycle and now back to Cat 5. Strong and large hurricanes, a deadly combination. And this is a sobering, scary situation. And we got to channel all that fear into getting ready before tomorrow winds of tropical storm force start to arrive in the Florida Keys and southern Florida and work their way northward. The new forecast path, a little bit of a shift to the west again, but because of the strength and the size, the width of this hurricane, you don't have to be in the cone to get life-threatening wind and water conditions. So let's not be breathing this huge sigh of relief if you're not in the cone. You're still under hurricane warnings and storm surge warnings on the southeast coast of Florida. The right edge of the cone still goes over Miami. So this is still going to affect all of the Florida Peninsula with some very dangerous conditions. The intensity forecast still essentially saying, well, we're going to have at least a Cat 4 between Cuba and the Florida Keys, so it could come ashore as a 4 or a 5 over the Keys and into southwest Florida, and then depending on exactly how much time it spends over land would determine how strong it is when it gets to northern Florida. But in any event, not a huge change here for what it means for the Florida Peninsula, especially with the increasing threat for southwest and the rest of the Gulf Coast of the Florida Peninsula. And oh, by the way, it's going to slow down and linger over the Tennessee Valley later on Tuesday and Wednesday. Even if it's not a tropical storm anymore, could still dump a tremendous amount of rainfall. Let's highlight again some of the aspects of this that are so concerning. You're starting to get some of the outer rain bands, the very outermost rain bands of Irma starting to get close to the upper Florida Keys and southeastern Florida. That will not contain tropical storm force winds, but that will be perhaps in these bands when this makes its way closer. And by tomorrow morning, you could be getting tropical storm force winds arriving in the Florida Keys and southern Florida, and then it'll be about midday when they could arrive up in the area of Naples, Fort Myers, and so forth. Again, I wanted to highlight the timing issues here, and this is because of the size of the hurricane. We are going to get the arrival of winds of tropical storm force perhaps as much as a day before the core of the hurricane might pass closest to any given point. So the time to be ready is by, about 8 a.m. tomorrow morning in the Florida Keys and extreme southeastern Florida. It might take a little longer than that for the winds to arrive for tropical storm force, but you don't want to bank on that right now. This is the time you need to be ready by. So finishing the things before you go to bed tonight is a good idea. And in the Florida Keys, that means get out. There is no safe place in the Florida Keys in this grave of a situation. You got to get out of the Florida Keys. And in southeastern Florida, in southwestern Florida, it's about adhering to the evacuation instructions from local officials. Now, I want to talk to some of the folks who live in Collier County, in the Naples area. We've talked to their emergency management officials tonight. And one thing they are saying is that you need to wake up early tomorrow morning because there might be revised, new, expanded evacuation instructions for Collier County because of the increasing threat as every hour goes by. Surge event there, and because the winds of tropical storm force might not arrive there until, say, midday, early afternoon, there is time in the morning. And it may even take longer than that for those winds to arrive, but certainly in the morning, there's time to see what your emergency managers are saying and to do what they say so that we get as many people out of very dangerous, potentially deadly storm surge vulnerable locations and go to a safer place. And then when you get farther north, say in the Orlando area, you're talking maybe as early as late tomorrow night or early Sunday when the winds of tropical storm force could arrive. This is going to be not just deadly storm surge vulnerable locations and go to a safer place. And then when you get farther north, say as well. And then as we get into Sunday morning, that's when things could start to really go downhill in northern Florida. So again, recapping that Irma has become again a Category 5 hurricane, maximum sustained winds at 160 miles per hour. And oh, by the way, there has been again a northward extension of hurricane warnings and watches. So we will get those graphics updated for you. And Paul, we will be conveying to the folks farther north that as these watches and warnings extend farther north in Florida, that time is getting shorter to prepare.
And Dr. Knob, I got some Q&As I hope we can do with you right now. Looking at the new advisory, it says Irma making landfall on the Camagüey archipelago of Cuba. So again, interaction with Cuba, is there any way that this could really continue to weaken it, even though the latest advisory has it back up to a Category 5?
It could have some effect, but probably not a tremendous effect on weakening the hurricane. That is because the forecast path takes it very close to the northern coast of Cuba, but not spending a lot of time with the entire eye and the eye wall completely over land. And again, if we look quickly at the forecast path, highlight why this is probably not going to be a big effect, because look at how quickly it begins to turn in the forecast, and looking at all the models upon which this forecast is based, at best we're going to be skirting the north coast of Cuba for a while, but that leaves, and by the way, this is not a tremendously mountainous part of Cuba. The higher mountains are down in the southeastern part of the island. So with at least half of the circulation remaining offshore and this being pretty flat land for the most part, it's going to be able to tap into the warmth of the waters in the Florida Straits. And because it is so strong and so large, even a temporary decrease in the intensity will enable this large hurricane to make a recovery, Paul.
And Dr. Now, big concern with the storm surge warning here across Lee and Collier County. But now the new warning, the new update has it including the Tampa Bay area as well. What's the concern level in Tampa Bay with the potential storm surge there?
Yeah, and I've got the graphic to show what you just described. Let's look at where the new storm surge warnings are in effect. That this includes the Tampa Bay area and not just the Gulf front part of Tampa Bay area. Tampa Bay itself is included in this storm surge warning, and this still goes all the way around on the east coast of Florida, just about as far north. So this is still an issue for both coasts. And yes, because of the shift in the track to the west that we've seen over the last 24 hours, this is increasing the threat of direct major hurricane impacts in Southwest Florida and the Gulf Coast up to the Tampa Bay area. So certainly, with already having seen evacuation instructions being issued by Pinellas County earlier today, where they have decided to call for evacuations in Zone A and for mobile homes, we got to keep listening for what the officials in the Tampa Bay area are saying about what all of this new information might mean for what people should be doing. And because there is time, a little bit more time to get ready in the Tampa Bay area than, say, in southeastern and southwestern Florida. The winds of tropical storm force in the Tampa Bay area, earliest reasonable time those might arrive would be something like very early Sunday morning. So there is, during the day tomorrow, to make additional preparations and evacuations in the Tampa Bay area, Paul.
All right, that's our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp. Thanks for that. We'll check back with you again shortly, and again throughout tonight and throughout the weekend, throughout the hurricane as well. Let's go to another vulnerable part of Florida. That's the southeastern side and Fort Lauderdale as well, and bring in my colleague, Mike Bettis. And Mike, my biggest concern for people there in southeastern Florida is that they're seeing the latest advisory and cast shifting it farther and farther west, that they could put their guard down there on that southeastern Florida coastline, and they can still have devastating impacts and even still be, maybe 60 miles from the center.
Yeah, I would say don't be fooled by the cone. Like at this point, you could almost ignore the cone, because literally there are parts of Miami and Fort Lauderdale that aren't even in the cone anymore, which that's just an indication of where the center may go. Okay, it doesn't mean that's where the impacts will stop, is at the edge of that cone. We're still forecasting 100-mile-an-hour winds here in Fort Lauderdale. We're still forecasting 10 feet of storm surge. Okay, so don't think everything's cool because you might be out of the cone. That's not the case whatsoever. We're just saying that the center may be shifting farther west, not that you're not going to feel anything from it, all right? Our winds have been going up steadily here this evening since we've been in Fort Lauderdale. I've got an anemometer attached here to my tablet. Winds have steadily been over 20 miles an hour with gusts that have been a little bit closer to 30, all right? These numbers are going to double by the time you wake up in the morning. And take a look at the wind gusts that we've got across South Florida. Many places right now reporting wind gusts in the 20s. We've got a wind that's screaming out of the northeast right now, and we're going to see that shift around just a little bit more from the west, or from the east, excuse me. And then we think maybe more from the southeast as we go through time. We're going to just push a lot of water onto shore here. We're going to be underwater if we were to stay here. We won't be staying here. We'd be underwater when this thing comes ashore. Take a look at the forecast for Fort Lauderdale. I want to time this out for you so you've got the specifics for you. That includes 40-mile-per-hour winds in the morning, tropical storm force winds, 100-mile-per-hour winds beginning by Sunday morning, lasting through Sunday afternoon, okay? 100-mile-an-hour winds through the day on Sunday. That's crazy. Then think about the rain that we're going to see. 1 foot to 1.5 foot of rain, which will cause flooding in areas that are not surge prone. So in areas where you weren't asked to evacuate because of surge, you may be taking on high water because of just the heavy rain. And then consider also that surge forecast, which is tremendous. We're talking upwards of 10 feet. And that means that the beach in Fort Lauderdale will be wiped out. Sand and water will come over A1A, first floors of a lot of the businesses, the condos, the hotels right here will take on water. they could take on some damage with then waves on top of that storm surge that are just eating away at them and lashing them. Mark Elliott, it is not a kind forecast at all. And we cannot stress enough how vitally important it is to take this storm seriously. I think a lot of people have, but this is a storm the likes of which we have not seen in this part of Florida in a long time.
So many good points, Mike. You can't just assume that because you've been through a storm that you know what this storm is going to do. That's lots of people going back towards history. And the wave action on top of the surge is such a huge part of this story. That's where all the energy is, right, Mike? I mean, that's the battering part of this storm.
Yeah. I would say it makes me think about Hurricane Katrina, which was an epic surge maker, right? You had huge water rise, but then it was all the waves on top of the water rise, and that's where you get things that just get battered and basically chewed up, okay? And we saw stuff like a McDonald's, totally flattened and wiped out. I saw Kmart just absolutely eaten away, Mark. And one thing that I remember distinctly about Katrina, and not saying that this is the exact comparison, but it's you can think of it in these minds. I saw this big block of cement, and I thought, what the heck is that big giant block of cement that's standing there, but nothing else is? I walked around the side of it and saw a big giant wheel. It was a safe. The bank was gone, Mark. The only thing left standing was the concrete reinforced safe. That's the only thing that survived.
Yeah, I mean,
things like that could be similar with a storm surge with this.
Absolutely. I mean, these are scary numbers for these storm surge impacts. Let's go through a couple of the other impacts for you, kind of city by city here. We'll get back to Mike in just a sec. Mike, thanks so much for sticking with us here. Look at this in Miami. If you say are in one of those condos, not even a high rise, a condo somewhere near the coastline, up to 10 feet of storm surge, and then a wave forecast on top of that of 20 footers, that's not out of the question, right? This is a very damaging forecast in southeast Florida still, even as the center may be going closer to southwest Florida. Fort Myers, a surge up to 12 feet, plus 1.5 feet of rain. Tampa, no picnic either. We'll be right back.
Lives are saved at the beginning of the storm. Lives are saved at the beginning of the storm.
At this point, there's no doubt that Florida will have severe impacts from Hurricane Irma.
You don't have until Sunday to get ready. You don't have until Sunday to move. You have to start doing it now.
Nice wrap-up and montage there of all the things that folks in Florida in particular are doing to get ahead of
You are watching the Weather Channel's coverage of Hurricane Irma. A Category 5 has re-strengthened as of the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center. Winds now back up to 160 miles per hour as it now makes a beeline for Florida. And we think that much of Florida, South Florida in particular, could be hammered by this. A track that shifted just slightly to the west and now bringing much of the west coast of Florida into play for some of the highest winds. Surge now becoming a very big issue as well. We know that there are many places in Florida that have been preparing, and certainly here in Fort Lauderdale, home to a lot of people. Broward County is home to nearly 2 million people and doing everything they can to get out of harm's way and hunker down for this storm. Jay Gray joins me here in Fort Lauderdale this evening. Jay, I don't know about you, but I certainly got the sense today that people had this nervous apprehension about it, that there was this anxiety about it, because I think they're all now on this realization that this is something that most of them have never seen before.
Yeah, Mike, I think you're absolutely right. I think you nailed it there, and it's an important point. I think a lot of people are taking this seriously and now beginning to feel that it's a real thing, that this is going to happen. And, you know, you talk about the track moving just a little bit. It has, and it could wobble some more, who knows. This is such a monster storm. It's going to affect the entire state. Look, it's on the move right now. It's expected to strike first in the Keys. Before it's all over, like we're saying, it could really affect everyone in Florida. Sunset on the edge of Irma. A quiet evening ahead of what forecasters say could be a catastrophic weekend.
Hurricane Irma continues to be a threat that is going to devastate the United States.
Florida is the primary target of the massive storm that stretches across an area bigger than the state. Home improvement stores are running out of supplies. Grocery store shelves are empty too as preparations continue.
You got to be ready. Price you pay for living in Florida.
But there's concern. The cost of this storm could be overwhelming.
We are running out of time. The storm is almost here. If you are in an evacuation zone, you need to go now. This is a catastrophic storm that our state has never seen.
Officials have launched what could be the largest mass evacuation in U.S. history. 5.6 million urged to leave. But getting out is getting more difficult. Airports are closing, bus routes canceled.
But they can't even give us an ETA on the buses.
Roads are packed and gas is tough to find. South Beach and other cities are virtually empty. Still, there are some here who've decided to stay.
I think we're going to hang it out and hunker down and take it easy.
A dangerous decision because forecasters warn nothing about Irma will be easy. Yeah, and Mike, as we've been talking about all day, the window of opportunity to really get out of the strike zone is closing real quickly. I'm sure you agree, and I think a lot of people are coming to that realization, right?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think some of the numbers that you mentioned there in your piece are really astounding. 5.6 million people asked to evacuate. Another one I heard, Jay, Florida Power and Light, the electricity provider here, estimating that as many as 4.1 million customers could lose power. I think just showing you how, you know, at the very least, this is going to be an inconvenient storm to people.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's we repeat it a lot. It's a monster storm, and if you have the chance, you ought to get out of its way.
Jay Gray, great stuff this evening. Thank you very much. And we know that the conditions only worsen from this point going forward. Want you to stick around because we come back. We're going to be checking in with our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knapp, the former director of the National Hurricane Center. We're going to get an inside look at what the forecast holds. Stay with us.
Irma is once again a Category 5 hurricane, and it's a wide one as well. Intense, big hurricanes are bad news, and the only thing we can do is everything possible to prepare before the devastation begins in Florida tomorrow, as winds of tropical storm force will start arriving during the day tomorrow in the Florida Keys and make their way northward. Maximum sustained winds are at 160 miles per hour, Category 5 once again. It went through an eye wall replacement cycle. Major hurricanes tend to go through ups and downs like this, and I know it was probably a little bit of good news when you heard that it went from Category 5 to Category 4, but it wasn't permanent because it went down in intensity because the inner eye wall collapsed, but the outer eye wall has taken over and started to contract, and it is back to Category 5. Now, it is interacting with Cuba. It has made landfall on the north central coast of Cuba, on the keys that they have there, these barrier islands on the north coast there. But it's moving west at 13 miles per hour, and it's going to begin a turn to the west-northwest and then north-northwest, according to the models here, before too much longer. So that means it's not going to spend a lot of time with the entire eye and eye wall over the relatively flat area of Cuba. The mountainous parts of Cuba are down more to the southeast. So let's take a look at the new forecast track and try to dissect what this all means. So you can see that turn anticipated as we go into the day tomorrow and tomorrow night. And that turn is going to bring it away from Cuba, very, very warm waters between Cuba and the Florida Peninsula and the Florida Keys. So the forecast is for this to be a Category 4 or 5 hurricane when it goes over the Florida Keys. And as we talked to the governor of Florida, Rick Scott, earlier this evening, I'll reiterate what he said. The only thing out, while there might still be a little bit of time left to do so, because there is not going to be any safe place in the Florida Keys when this hurricane goes across them, because of the winds and the storm surge will be devastating. This will also affect the entire Florida Peninsula, one way or the other. Don't think that just because you're not in the cone on portions of the southeast coast of Florida that you aren't still in line to get life-threatening hurricane-force winds and storm surge and heavy rainfall. I'll show you the watches and warnings with regard to storm surge in a little bit. Now, because of the shift to the west, again on this advisory, this brings the southwest coast of Florida, the Gulf Coast of Florida up near the Tampa Bay area, into an area where the threat of storm surge just continues to increase. And that's an area that's very vulnerable to storm surge, especially southwestern Florida. The forecast is also for it to weaken but slow down over the southeast and the Tennessee Valley, and that could be a big, big rainmaker. And by the way, we've talked all about the hurricane force winds, the major hurricane force winds, the storm surge, but this is also going to be a big inland flood risk for all of the Florida Peninsula, because we could be getting more than a foot of rain in a number of spots with a large, not really fast-moving hurricane. It can dump heavy rainfall totals in a very short amount of time. So this is not just going to be a coastal event. This is going to be inland. This is not just going to be a wind event. It's going to be water as well. And certainly an area where the first full brunt of the hurricane will be felt here in the continental U.S. is in the Florida Keys. And we are fortunate to be able to talk to one of the forecasters, a senior forecaster with the National Weather Service office in Key West, Chip Casper. Chip, we've known each other for a long time. It's good to hear your voice, and thank you for everything you and your staff are doing down there. How are you tonight?
We're doing pretty good, Rick. We're busy, as you know, and we're just trying to get everybody to get out of the Keys, make sure nobody's on a boat, and spend these last few hours just protecting life and property.
Now, we've been talking a lot about the timing of when the winds of tropical storm force might first arrive in the Florida Keys, and that earliest possible arrival seems to be plus or minus around 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. What are you hearing about what officials are telling folks who might still be there, how much time and logistically how they can still get out of the Florida Keys, since that's not going to be a safe place to be?
Yeah, they're just basically saying there's still time. If you can leave right now. There's not a lot of people down here. The roads are clear. It's still relatively safe. We do have a few squalls, but now's the time to go.
I don't know how you guys are feeling with this hurricane on your doorstep like this, but is there any worst scenario for the Florida Keys with regard to hurricane that you can imagine?
No, this storm has it all. It's big. It's going to have a lot of rain, a lot of wind, and obviously for the Florida Keys, the biggest risk is the storm surge flooding. This is how most people die in hurricanes, and it concerns everybody here very much.
What about past analogs? If people are thinking back to any past hurricanes and hopefully they're not trying to make a decision based on, well, I lived through such and such in the past, or that wasn't so bad, so this won't be so bad. What can we compare this to, or what should we not compare this to?
Well, as you know, each storm is unique, and so they're all violent in some way. They all have their hazards. In early September, there's a lot of historical hurricanes that have had great impacts in the Florida Keys. This is kind of like Donna in 1960, but it's much bigger, so and more intense.
Yeah, what are the plans for you folks at your office? I know it's a hardened facility and it's comparatively in a higher part of the Key West area, but what are you all doing to prepare yourselves, your families, and continue your mission?
Yes, well, most of our families have already evacuated, and so they are safe and sound on the mainland. We have our staff is kind of hunkered down the facility here. Our shutters are down, and we all have plenty of provisions, food, and water. And so we're going to shelter in place here once tropical storm force winds begin. We'll have everybody in here before that, and we'll lock it down, and we'll continue to conduct our mission, saving lives and property. Keep people safe.
Yeah, and I have personally visited that facility to visit with you. Not only is it an impressive facility, it's an impressive group of men and women you have down there. Chip, all the best to you and your family, and we really appreciate everything you all are doing. We hope we can keep the total of lives lost during the storm to 0 in the Florida Keys. Chip, thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Dr. Nam.
Paul, it's a scary time in the Florida Keys, but they have been doing everything possible down there to get people out. And as the senior forecaster, Chip Casper, just said, there's still time to get out. If you have been straggling, you've got to get out. There's no safe place in the Florida Keys. And in Southwest Florida, evacuation instructions also in place.
And I think what he said was crucial is now's the time to do it. The roads are a lot less populated with traffic because, again, hopefully you already had the crush and the roads have cleared. So if you're watching us from Miami-Dade County or Broward County or Monroe County, which includes the Keys, as well as here in Collier County or Lee County, you still got time. If you get on the road tonight or first thing, 4 or 5 in the morning, get a couple of hours in before the sun comes your way, yeah, you can make good headway. And again, if you're looking for a place to go, you can go out towards the Florida Panhandle. There should hopefully be some hotels available there, and the traffic should be perhaps the same distance, hour or time-wise, if you try to go farther north up towards Atlanta, where a lot of Floridians have tried to evacuate already, and that was definitely a long ride. I've heard horror stories about that commute. Here in Collier County, I'm on Naples Beach here, and the water probably about maybe 35 yards from where I'm standing, and it's only about maybe 4 feet lower. The concern here in southwestern Florida is the storm surge, which could be maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 feet, which would actually put it maybe about 3 to 5 feet above my head, which means this hotel and resort we're staying next to would definitely be underwater because of that. And there's also a big concern of the wind as well, but specifically the storm surge in this portion of Florida. We are under a mandatory evacuation for areas west and south of US 41 here in Collier County and all the barrier islands, and also continues into Lee County, where Fort Myers is, including all the barrier islands there, and also the mobile homes and manufactured homes, also mandatory evacuations in those areas as well. Let's head over to the east side of the state and check in now with Mike Bettis, who is in Fort Lauderdale. And Mike, we've been talking about this for the longest time. Irma is not just a point, and Dr. Knabb even pointed out that the size, the scope of even the wind field and the cloud field with Irma is growing. So do not let your guard down there on the East Coast as well. Yeah. You're in for quite a ride when Irma approaches there as well.
Yeah, it's going to be a beating, Paul. There's no question about what this is going to what's going to happen here. Size is so important when it comes to tropical systems. These things that are big churning systems, they can do so much damage because their wind field is large. So you put more people at risk because you put more people under the threat of wind. They can generate huge swells and big storm surge, especially ones that have been out there over the water for a while. Irma's been out there over the water for a while, and so you're just generating more and more waves as you get the forward approach. And then you think about the big rain shield that they produce. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible how much rain you could put down over a large chunk of the state of Florida, where you could have flooding literally from the Keys all the way to Georgia. So it's going to be a really tough go for us here. And as you have been mentioning, Paul, the winds have been picking up. The waves are now starting to come up on the beach as well. A lot more white caps today than what we had yesterday for sure. So I think maybe now that people, Paul, have been out this evening, they've seen how the winds have picked up, because that's always the first thing that you notice. I think they go, oh, okay, now it's becoming very, very real. You know, that I feel like it's not real until they start to feel some of the weather. And now that we're starting to feel it today, I think people are really starting to take notice, saying, this is it, I'm ready to go.
And what about in just terms of the population of people walking around or just kind of doing the sightseeing? Have you seen that kind of dramatically tail off since you've been there the last, say, 1 or 2 days?
I would say, you know what's interesting, Paul? Yesterday, the folks that we saw, and there weren't many, were just people taking sandbags down to the beach to fill them up to take. People that have been out have been mostly people that have been down at a pizzeria down the street to grab some dinner, and that's it. I mean, we're right along A1A, and on a Friday night, there would be thousands of people here, thousands, down at the beach, walking on the sidewalks, getting dinner, getting something to drink, shopping. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us out here, our crew. That's it. There's nobody else out here. A lot of first responders going by in their cars, that's it. There's nobody else out here. It's a ghost town.
What about the hotel, Mike? Is it just for media and first responders, or do you actually see people staying at your hotel who perhaps have evacuated other areas?
Good question. A lot of people have asked about that. All the hotels right here along Fort Lauderdale Beach are empty. They're all closed. This is an evacuation zone, so all the hotels have closed up. There's nobody staying at them. We actually have a place that's 15 miles from the water inland, is where our hotel is. And we actually have 2 places potentially that we could stay in. That location, which is, we think, free from storm surge. Another location a little bit closer to the beach, but it's up higher and free from storm surge that way as well. Maybe a little bit more susceptible to wind, but it's a very sturdy concrete structure, and we can put our cars up too, Paul. We got a 4-story parking garage that we can park on, which will be more than enough to prevent us from taking on water in our cars. So our crew, ourselves, we're in good shape, but there's no chance you can stay here in Fort Lauderdale, especially east of Federal Highway. Everything's closed. Hotels are all closed. You can't stay there.
All right, that's Mike Bettis live tonight in Fort Lauderdale. We'll check back with you coming up in a few minutes. Again, here in Naples, we're right now on the beach here. We might even be here tomorrow early in the evening, but when we know that Irma starts to approach, we're going to hightail it out of here. There is no safe place for us. It's not high enough with this risk of that storm surge, maybe over 12 feet in this area. But again, that's with Irma, Category 4, Category 5, but let's talk about the wind and damage potential in each category of hurricane brings when they make landfall. Our Mark Elliott has more on that.
When it comes to hurricanes, each one's impacts are a little bit different, but the wind speeds that we talk about along the Saffir-Simpson scale, those are very specific, and the damage caused in those categories, kind of predictable. So let me show you. Let's start off with a Category 1 storm. And the damage here, not too bad. A couple of shingles fall off, you can have some palm fronds bending in the wind, but everything basically remains intact. Category 2, that's where you really start to feel it. Look at the windows of the house. They can be hit from debris from the outside and already start breaking in a Category 2. Your trees are significantly bent over in the wind, and the siding of the house itself can break, flapping there in the wind, adding to those eerie noises inside. Category 3. I've heard only a Category 3, but it's not only anything except really bad news. In a Category 3, you can have the door of the house blown in because the winds get so strong. You can have the roof of the house start to flap up and down in the wind because it can lift off those weak points, and a lot of those trees start to fall. Category 4, the damage is even worse. You get most trees falling, most of your windows breaking, most of your shingles fly away, and then Cat 5 is as high as the category scale goes. By Cat 5, no shingles remain anywhere nearby. The holes in the roof get so big that the walls of the house start to fall because they're not attached to anything anymore. There won't be any trees up in the neighborhood. That's just catastrophic damage.
Again, every hurricane is different. People here in Cuyahoga County who survived and lived through Wilma and even Charley don't expect Irma to be like that. Irma could bring a much larger storm surge. I want to bring back our hurricane specialist, Dr. Rick Knabb. Sorry, it's been a long couple of days here,
Paul,
Dr. Knabb.
You're doing a great job.
We're tracking Irma, and behind Irma we have another powerful Category 4 Hurricane Jose. Now, typically, when you have one hurricane moving through the Atlantic or any body